Fuck it, we'll do it live.
Oh, that was good. That was good.
Yes.
Hello and welcome to Story Weavers, the podcast where we discuss anything and everything story related.
Here, we'll delve into inspiration, plot, structure, character, and dialogue. Be it in books, movies, music, comics, television, or anything else, we'll be covering it from conception to reception.
We'll be discussing between ourselves as well as with other creators and fans about their experiences, routines, and techniques. Join us and find your next inspiration. We're your hosts, Dean Bradley
And John William Worth.
and this is Story Weavers. Hey guys, welcome back to Story Weavers, the podcast where we talk anything and everything stories. Today, we are here with Josh Pomponio again in this two-part interview. Josh is an independent filmmaker, photographer, movie buff, and just
Creative.
all-around stand-up guy. John and I have known him for a number of years now, and we're very happy to be able to talk to him on this podcast and get his perspective on the film industry and filmmaking and the creative side of filming. So today we're actually going to talk about one of Josh's creations. It is a short film called Analogic, which Josh wrote, directed, and starred in. Absolutely phenomenal film. And I'll go ahead and let Josh introduce it and himself, a little bit what it's about, and then we'll get into it. So Josh, welcome back. Thanks for coming on again.
Of course, thank you for having
All
me.
right, so tell us a little bit about Analogic. Give us a little overview behind what it is.
Sure, yeah. So Analogic is a short film that I wore multiple hats on. I wrote the script, I directed it, I appear in it, I also edited it. And it is a story about a young man who is in search of of inspiration, in the form of relationships and women. And he's a photographer. He meets a woman in Paris, and he tells the story of their friendship through the photographs he has of her. And so as he's getting ready in like New York to open his like a gallery, he is showing, his friends, this picture of her, and he tells them, how they would meet. They kind of come up with this arrangement to not tell each other their names, and so that way they don't look at each other up on social media and learn everything about each other right away. They kind of take things slow. They spontaneously arrange their meetings, saying, "Oh, but tomorrow I'm going to be at this place. Wouldn't it be funny if you're there?" And they have this connection. And he, when he is back in New York, he is trying to recreate that spark of inspiration that he was missing, that he's missing from this person. And it's a very personal story. It's a lot of me in the character, and a lot of my I think my philosophy is in the movie. So it was a very personal film to make, something that was kind of years in the making. That finally kind of came to fruition in the fall of 2021 when we shot it.
Well, let's just dive right in and talk about that. What made you decide to want to film this, or what events happened that allowed you the ability to film a movie, and also why Paris?
I mean, why not Paris? I mean, I've fell in love with Paris the moment I landed there, 5 years ago. I cannot get enough of that city.
It's so cool.
So
You have some great shots in it, but it never screams like, "Hey, this is Paris." It's just you happen
It's
to
a
be in the city
character,
of
but-
Paris while you're in the movie.
hmm Yeah, that was definitely intentional, on my part, from having, gone to the city several times over the years. By the time we shot the movie there, I did that intentionally. Like, I didn't want to shoot things with the Eiffel Tower and the background every
Right.
shot. Paris is a city that people live in and feel things, and it's more, it's not really, it's not a tourist destination, and I really wanted to convey that in the film, and I think I'm glad it kind of defies expectations
Mm-hmm.
that way. It's very deliberate choice, but the inception for it, comes from it's a lot of different things. I guess the straightforward version is that in that summer of COVID, that summer
Mm-hmm.
of 2020, I was out of a job. I was, trying to figure out what to do with my time, and I have a really good friend who she is in the movie, Shimrit Eldis. She's an
Absolutely
actress. I met
Great
her here.
phenomenal,
performance.
by the way. We'll talk more about her
I
later,
love
but
her.
oh my gosh, she was
Yeah,
incredible.
she's incredible. So I had met her here in New York almost 10 years ago now, but she lives in Tel Aviv at the moment, or for the last several years, where she's
Mm-hmm.
from. And but thanks to modern technology, we chat all the time, and stuff. And so we were talking just one day, and we were she was also out of a job. She was just waiting for the world to get back to normal. And we were thinking, like, oh, wouldn't it be great, when we can finally travel again? Well, we should like really do all these things that we're talking about doing. We should make a
Mm-hmm.
movie. And she's like, yeah, like we should make a movie in Paris. She loves Paris as much as I do, and it just came from this. I had nothing else to do. I just had this kind of dream of one day I can go to Paris with my friend and make a movie. And I started writing this script, and almost a year later, we did it. Things had kind of eased up a bit, and we had some funding, and
Yeah.
we just
That's
it was me and her and our
but it
friend
was
Kareem
it was a
and a
pretty
camera.
small project. Yeah, you had Kareem filming, but you only had one cameraman for the
Hmm.
whole film, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we had Kareem came with us to Paris to shoot those scenes, and then we had another cameraman, another uh,
DP.
mutual friend of ours,
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Gomez.
Oh, that's right.
He shot the 2
Forgot
days.
Gomez
Yeah,
did that for you too. Yeah,
yeah. He shot the 2 days we were in Hoboken in the studio, and
cool.
so yeah, very very intimate project. Just a handful of people involved. Yeah.
Hmm. So the original idea for Analogic, this is just what did you first come up with it while you were discussing with Shimrit and during 2020, during the year of COVID, or was it an idea bouncing around in your head beforehand, like what I would like to make a film about this
Hmm.
topic, this subject, about two people meeting in an analog way, hence the name Analogic.
Hmm. Well, I was taking some inspiration from a film I did in college, which had a similar plot of it was about a woman photographer who her friend sees in all her photos in the background, like the guy wearing like a red leather jacket.
Oh, I like that.
And turns out all the places that she was photographing were like her favorite spots or something, and then she meets the guy. But that was kind of the genesis of like, oh, you have a person telling a story through photos. And when I was working in New York with you guys, and I was kind of getting exposed more to like the world and traveling and meeting other people. I love that idea of the photographs telling a story,
Mm-hmm.
and I kept that in my head as I was doing other projects. I was like, how can I kind of repurpose that for something different? And I kind of simple, a story of, boy meets girl, boy loses girl. And I thought, being a photographer myself, being a filmmaker, that would be a good use of this kind of structure, and changing it a bit, with that, knowing the person before you take the photos. The idea of like kind of remaining nameless. It came from one of my favorite movies of Last Tango in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
Bernardo
Brando and Maria
Bertolucci.
Schreider, they say like, oh, they don't want to know anything about each other outside of the bedroom, outside of the apartment. And in the 70s, that's feasible because you don't have the internet, you don't have social media, you can't find someone at the click of your fingers. And as I was kind of writing, kind of thinking of that, and writing like kind of like an not like an updated version, obviously, but
How do
like
you bring
I
this
was
into
thinking
the
like
21st
how.
century?
Yeah, how do you bring this in the 21st century? And it's like, what if you just have, that, and that comes
Two
out in the
characters who
dialogue. They just
agree to do
decide.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Two characters who agree to that. They
Right.
yeah.
Which is refreshing because it, I mean, I'm making the connection in my head to like a horror film, but it's like, how in the modern era, it's like we've got cell phones and all this stuff. So it's not as easy to be stuck in a situation like that. This is a lot like it. And it was kind of, I remember watching the film, and when the two characters just kind of agree to, oh, we're not going to look each other up. We're not going to tell each other our names. We just want to enjoy the moment and be people. The honesty and the directness was just refreshing, especially for people, I would say, like of our age, who
grew up without that.
Grew up without that, and in some ways maybe want to go back to that, or miss that kind of feeling of just spontaneity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that is something that affects our generation, because we're a very transitional generation, having been young enough to remember before the internet, and also growing up while the internet itself is growing up and kind of becoming a bigger and
Maturing
bigger
with
presence
us.
in our lives. Yeah, and I think subconsciously or maybe even consciously, people of our generation, we try to, I don't think it's a type of nostalgia, but we kind of want to bring some of that innocence back into our lives. We have this innocent kind of way of looking back at this pre-internet time.
There's a grandeur
we,
in mystery.
There is, and then the other thing, playing into like the nostalgia aspect, it's like bringing that little piece of your childhood or the days you miss, bringing it into the modern day, and in a way just seeing how it interacts with you at this more mature age, seeing what's different and what changed.
So I remember reading about Renoir, and he's I don't know if he's my second compared to Wells, or if they're, I think they're both tied for being my favorite filmmaker, Jean Renoir, the French filmmaker, son of the painter. He was born in 1894, and so he was only kind of a child in the 1800s and the 19th century for only a few years, but for the rest of his life, he always considered himself a man of the 19th century. He looked back on that period, from having lived it as a little bit as a child, but then also reading literature written at the time by like his father's friends. His father was friends with not Emile Zola, so he knew all those guys, kind of directly or indirectly. And as he grew up, and he kind of matured, he read things from his childhood, and that affected him, in the 20th century, but still feeling like a man in the 19th century. And I feel like that about myself in a way, and
with regard
how
to
I
the
approach
90s.
my filmmaking. Yeah, like I am a child of the 20th century. I'm I was only there for 10 years, but that last decade of that century, I think, was so very different than the next 20 years that have come. The 2000s, 2010s. It's such a different way of it was such a different time that I feel like I'm, even though I've lived more in the 21st century and have grown up more here, I feel like I'm still a man of the 20th century. I still feel this kind of pre-internet kind of way of thinking.
I think a lot of our
I don't really need
feels that way.
Definitely. Yes.
And I think that's probably that's subconsciously in Analogic. Is this way, I play the character of Vince, who's searching for inspiration, and meets the muse in Paris. And I feel like that's the theme that comes from the 90s, this idea of looking for a connection, looking for someone who inspires you, and not being able to find them right away, not being able to have that instant gratification of, oh, did my meme get 3 likes or 4 likes, or like something, did my crush view my story. Yeah. And I think that's a very different that's a very unique thing that I think we'll be the last generation to have.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see, though. I mean, that is true, but I mean, what comes in the next 20 years? I think what some people fail to remember is like the iPad, or people owning tablets. The general public, it's only been around 13 years. And so much has changed since then. So it'll be interesting to see what how future generations feel that same sort of nostalgia. But
it'll be interesting to see.
Go ahead.
I was to kind of end our tangent here.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say it'll be interesting to see what in 20 or 30 years, what young people now who will be adults then, what will they be nostalgic about from now?
Right.
Like what is nostalgic about our era now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah.
It's always I like. Sorry if I'm
no. Go ahead.
But
You're
it's
good.
like one of the things I like looking at is seeing how, as we age, we react to different things, and kind of like seeing how those who come after us, they start following, seeing how they change and how they largely stay the same. Like how you said, in 20 years, are they going to be feeling the exact same things like we are now, and that they're sometimes criticizing us, like, the overabundance of nostalgia.
Except it'll be about like
going back.
TikTok, not Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah,
right.
It's like, or Vine. Vine was our TikTok, but now TikTokers look back on Vine and they're like, "What's that?"
We were still like 20. We were in our late teens, early 20s
so
by
fast.
the time Vine was a thing, and that was a thing for what, a year.
Right, because it's like like Josh, how you were talking about Renoir. It's like he was born in, you said 1894, correct? And it's like, in a way, he almost aged with movie making. That was like the first thing I thought of, was like, gee, filmmaking kind of came around in the early 20th century, and so it kind of grew up with him to an extent. But I feel like now technology is moving at a much faster rate, almost faster than we are meant to kind of experience it to some way. So it's like the human experience is changing. So maybe that's why we keep yearning to go back to something simpler. It's like, I don't need every iDevice screaming at me when someone calls me, because it's like my computer, my watch, my phone, my iPad, everything. I don't need that. It's like, just go back to meeting someone in a park clandestinely. It's like, oh, I'll be here around this time of day. If you're there, it'd be cool.
Yeah. So yeah, to pull the rope back a little bit, as wonderful as that tangent was, and I think we could probably all talk about it for an hour.
Oh yes.
All right, we'd like to take a brief moment to remind you of our book of the month for December 2023. This month, we're reading Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo. Written in 1939, this is a fictional account of a soldier's experience in the aftermath of World War I and his experience on the battlefield in Europe. So I have started reading this book. I'm not terribly far into it. I'm only on page 40, so just a couple chapters in. But so far, it is quite eye-opening. It's definitely a little disturbing. And John, from what you've told me, it's probably going to get more disturbing and much heavier than where I am so far.
Oh yeah, this roller coaster keeps going downhill at a faster rate. Don't worry.
So, not that this book is funny in any manner. It's a very serious, heavy topic about the injuries sustained by a man in wartime. Yeah, we invite you all to read along with us. It is significantly shorter than The Splendid and the Vile was last month. So hopefully it won't take you quite as long to get through it. I actually am hoping to maybe do a second read of it before we get to the recording of the episode, because I think there's going to be a lot of meat in there and there's going to be a lot to process. And I want to be on top of my game because John read this book 20 years ago. And so
don't
I've got to catch up.
Like that. Don't age me. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to seeing what you think of it. Like, it changed me. It changed the woman who, at the time girl, now woman, who recommended it to me, and I want to see how it affects you.
Yeah. So join along with us, read it with us, or check out a summary on Wikipedia, however you want to do it. If you just want to listen to the episode when it comes out to make a decision on whether to read it, that's your call too. We enjoy reading, and we would invite you all to read these books with us. Now back to the episode. But so when you did go to Paris to film, did you have specific places in mind where you wanted to shoot things, or was it more kind of like, hey, let's walk around this area and find a good place to shoot depending on how crowded it was or how loud it was or weather or whatever?
There was a few places that I had in mind for, just for shooting like kind of any scene there, and there was, I think, only two specific places where I wanted specific scenes to be shot. One was
let me guess. Was one of them a cafe? Was one of them
Yeah,
a specific
no,
cafe?
I mean, no,
No,
not a
okay.
specific
I was
cafe.
just guessing. I was trying to take a gander.
It was at the along the Seine. You know, I wanted to
Okay, yeah.
have like kind of their peak emotional
The
moment to
sunset
be
scene.
on at the
With
sunset,
their
you know,
legs hanging over
talking
the
on the
water.
Seine.
Yeah.
The legs hanging, because that's a very Parisian thing to do. You know, people are just, you know, there drinking wine and eating
Mm-hmm.
baguettes and stuff. And I knew I wanted that scene to be there, and I knew I wanted the ending to be at the that
On the
bridge,
bridge. Yeah.
the Point de Burhacum or something. Never remember the name of it, but it's that iconic bridge. You know, Inception had a scene there. The Last Tango in Paris begins on that bridge, and so I wanted to end my movie there as a homage there.
Cool.
And the other place I wanted to shoot a specific scene was, you know, the where my character first meets the muse. I wanted to shoot it in the gardens of Luxembourg in the afternoon, because that place has amazing lighting. That's
Yeah.
the best place for light in the
See,
afternoon.
that's one of those things
And
I
even
never think of because I'm not a filmmaker. I never would like
mhm.
consider time of day or lighting for a scene, which probably
Oh, the
seems
golden
very
hour.
like obvious and intuitive to you. But yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, I wanted to shoot there, and it's funny too, because you know, when you make a movie, whether it's a big movie or a small movie, you don't shoot things in order.
Mm-hmm.
So on the very last day we were there, this Friday afternoon, we were shooting the first scene where our characters talk, mine and Shim's character, and she goes, "Oh, did you take a picture? Can I see?" They're having the walk, and I wanted to shoot it in this garden with this incredible afternoon lighting, and the whole week we were in Paris, we didn't have any trouble with like people coming up to us or getting stopped by police. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
everyone, it's Paris is like New York in that way. Everyone has a camera. Everyone's doing something.
Everyone just
It's
kind of
not
ignores
abnormal to
you.
see. Yeah. And so, you know, we're shooting this last scene, and, you know, it's going to be this last hour, we're going to be making this movie, and we're blocking it. We're kind of rehearsing and recording a few times. We can't quite get the timing right. And of course, I want to be cool and like Orson Welles and do everything in one long shot while
Mm-hmm.
we're walking together. And we're in the middle of filming it, and I could tell we were just getting things right when two security guys stop us, because apparently you can't show a government building in Paris in a video or in a film or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so they politely asked us to not do it, but they were kind of like trying to tell us what to say to them to allow us to keep shooting there. They're like, oh, like if it's for like social media or for like a student project, you know, that's fine. But if it's like a real couple, we couldn't quite, we kind of picked up on it, but we weren't quite sure.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And you know, we're like, oh, but it's like a film and
You
blah
want
blah
to get
blah. It's
back
like,
to
okay,
the
well then you
US
gotta go and
tomorrow?
stuff. And yeah, right. And but they were, you know, they were really polite about it. So then we walked a couple blocks over behind the Pantheon, and that's we ended up shooting in this alleyway, which
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
is on the corner of the steps where Owen Wilson meets the taxi to the 1920s from
Midnight in
Midnight in
Paris.
Paris.
Oh,
So
okay.
you know, that's another Paris movie homage and Analogic is that. I don't think you can quite. I think in the beginning of the shot, because again, the shot is still all one long kind of take as we're walking down the alleyway. And I think in the very beginning of the shot on the corner, you can just barely see the steps because of the way the architect,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you could just kind of barely see the steps that he
Hmm.
sits on and stuff. And you know,
Yeah, but I like, at least when I was watching that, I liked that scene because there was nothing super flashy about it. It's like as cool as some of the landmarks in
hmm
Paris would be. It's like, oh, you literally ran into each other in an alleyway, like just where people are just casually
hmm
walking. I wanted to ask about the script because, as we discussed in the last episode, Orson Welles is your favorite filmmaker, an idol of yours. When you wrote the script, so this is a two-parter. One, were you always
hmm
considering yourself as the lead actor or the lead performance? And two, I remember we discussed a little bit. Shimrit had some input into her character and some of the scenes. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit and explain the writing process, the storytelling
hmm
process, and how much improv maybe happened?
Sure. I think no matter what I'm writing, whether it's going to be something I'll shoot soon or just, you know, something I'm writing for the future or just for fun, I'm always imagining myself as the central character. Just there, I think I have that kind of thing that Wells had, that, you know, you, when you're creating something, it's you that it's
Piece of
creating.
yourself.
I have to be
Mhm.
in. I'm putting something of myself on the page, whether it's, you know, about emotions or love or hate or something. It's something that's coming from inside of me. So the way that I can relate to what's going on in the story is if I am there.
Mhm.
And I think Analogic is, you know, a bit more personal, because the character, even though, you know, I'm not really playing myself, I don't think, but like, I still think that it's a very very close to who I am and how I think, and my
And your
worldview,
reactions
and
Hmm.
and my reactions. You know, I just, and I don't think that I would have. I don't think I would have been as enthusiastic to make the movie if I was going to have
Someone
someone
else.
else playing that
Mhm.
part. Yeah, you know, and it's not like an ego thing. I don't think it's not like, oh, I need people to see that it's me in front of the screen and directing. It's not something that's like, look at me, look what I can do. It's more of like,
Just
I
because
need to do this. Like,
it's
I just need
personal
It
to.
and this
felt
is
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
this is yeah.
I need to be in that part.
Mhm.
I you know, and as far as, you know, other people's, you know, Shim's contribution, you know, she was with me, you know, from the beginning. I wrote the movie, work with her. I know, I think I write everything to work with her. I would, if I could cast her in all my movies, that'd
Mhm.
be, you know, I'd be in
Hmm.
heaven. Um, and yeah, I mean, some of the things, you know, I think she suggested certain lines of dialogue. She suggested different changes. You know, there's one part in the script where she's talking about how, like, you know, her characters, she's like the youngest of the three, but both her older siblings have husbands and are married and have kids and stuff like that,
Hmm.
and she's traveling the world. That's her.
Mhm.
You know, that's, you know, she didn't write that line of dialogue, but I know her well enough that, like, I know that's how she feels. Maybe, I mean, maybe she said that to me in person one time, and I just remembered it for the script or something.
Right.
Hmm.
But you know, that's really her, and she, you know, she embraced it, and she, you know, suggested different things. You know, she, you know, I think the one, her big monologue on the river, which I think it ended up kind of part of on the cutting room floor, I think was in the script, it was a bit longer, and then she suggested certain changes to cut it down more, and then we cut it down later. So, you know, and you know, film, even though I'm, you know, I'm a one man band as the editor and the producer and the writer and the director and the actor. You know, it's still, I still felt Analogic was a very collaborative film. You know,
Mhm.
Kareem made
Hmm.
suggestions that I didn't, you know, I hadn't thought of. You know, Steven and Hoboken made, you know, everyone, you know,
Contributed.
it's a collaborative
Yeah.
Oh
effort.
yes.
Everyone contributed something that I think made it the film that we watch today. I think,
Hmm.
you know,
I mean,
you
it's
know.
a testament the fact that for a lot of the film, I remember asking you this before as well. You know, a lot of like the street scenes and you and Shim kind of like walking around and like, you know, seeing the band playing and like all the crowd scenes.
Hmm.
I mean, it's shocking how much of the film wasn't that spontaneous, even though it felt super organic. And
Hmm.
then one thing I also wanted to ask, because Kareem was the DP, and as we just found out, Steven was also a photographer on the film. Did you always have your mind set on them to do the cinematography, or you know, well, how did you
Or did the
choose them?
stars
Or
just align properly?
exactly.
I think it was kind of both. You know, I owe Kareem a lot, because he got me the job that where we all met. You know,
Okay.
that my
Oh,
first
I
out of
didn't know
college
that.
job,
Yes.
and
Oh,
you know,
Nice.
yeah, because, well, I went to college with Kareem too. We
oh,
both went
okay.
Oh,
to William
okay.
Patterson. We
Okay.
had a lot of, yeah. So
So you guys
we
have
go
a
way
history. I
Okay.
back.
didn't know that.
Actually, yeah. And I felt like, you know, working in New York City for as long as I did, that really, I had a really, it had a really profound effect on the course of my life. You know, at 24 years old, and it really opened my, it really affected me profoundly. You know, that experience, and I felt I owed it to him. Uh, and I want to say thank you also. You know, I felt like one of the reasons why I was eventually having this opportunity to make the movie was in some way due to, you know, the job I got through him.
Mhm.
And, you know, he was in a similar position that I think we all were at that time of, you know, kind of changing careers, and
Mhm.
wanting to do what you really want to do. And I felt like, hey, and he was a really good, you know, you know, creative. You know, he's directed his own films, he's done
Hmm.
photography, and I thought, like, you know, this could be a good. I trust him. I think that's another thing that it comes down to when it's selecting any collaborator, whether it's
Very much
an
Mhm.
so.
actor
Very
or
much.
cameraman or editor, is that you have to trust the person. And I trusted Kareem to to come to Paris and shoot this film. And I you know, and not to diminish Steven's contribution, but I had wanted to keep working with Kareem when we shot the New York scenes, and or I said the scenes at the studio in Hoboken. But we had to shoot by a certain date, and Kareem wasn't available. And
Right.
Steven's also someone who I knew, who I trusted, who could be there, and I said, hey, you know, will you? And he did not hesitate to come and shoot for the couple of days we shot together. And his contributions are, you know, just as valuable as Kareem's in Paris.
Yeah.
You know,
Big
they both,
big shout out to Gomez. I love that dude.
Mhm.
He got me through a lot of
Cool.
days at work there.
Moral support.
Yeah.
And then this is just another random question that I just thought of when you mentioned like the filming at the steps. Were there any deleted scenes that you really said like, oh, I really want to keep that in there? Since you're also the editor, like, was there anything that was really...
No, I mean, yes and no. I mean, the film changed so much while I was editing it. You know, I originally intended it was supposed to be a feature, but then we didn't shoot quite enough material to cover a full 90 minutes. So I think like, you know, the very first like rough cut was like, you know, 45 minutes,
which is
it's
kind of an awkward length for a film.
Very.
Yeah. And then I eventually cut it to like, I think a half an hour, and then like it kept decreasing by like 5-minute intervals from like, you know, 30 minutes to 25 to 20 to I think the last version that we screened at a festival was 15 minutes. And so I mean, and it's a strange question, because it's like, yeah, like I wish I could have incorporated like everything that we shot in it, but not everything works, you know, or at least I'm not competent enough to make it work as an editor. You know, maybe I should have got someone else to edit. I'm not sure, but I, you know, I don't know. I would love to, you know, if I could do it. I mean, I wouldn't hesitate at the opportunity to do it again as a feature, because there's definitely scenes that were written that we didn't shoot. You know, there was a couple things. You know, the dynamic with my character and Selma's character and the Hoboken stuff, I think, is stronger in the script. And for whatever reason, I don't know if we didn't shoot scenes or if scenes didn't come across. You know, just I think there's another film to be made there from the script if I was to have a budget or something. But you know, as far as deleted scenes, you know, I don't know. I mean, I think in the latest scene, in the latest version, I cut out the Gajo singing guy on the steps, because it just felt weird, and I cut it out.
Punctuation in the middle of the sentence. Almost.
It was like this weird music video that comes up. But you know, it was one of those things where we talked about this in our Wallace episode about happy accidents. Like I remember when that happened. You know, we had just finished filming that scene of walking down that street in Montmartre, and this guy comes up to us and goes, "Oh, are you making a movie? What, can I be in it? Can you film me?" And it's just like he starts singing the song, and we shot this thing, we improvised, we accepted it. And I remember thinking, man, this is what Wells talked about. This is one of those happy accidents.
The busking scene. That's one of my favorite scenes. That's one of my favorite scenes in the whole film.
It's on the cutting room floor now, unfortunately. But
you're killing me. And I apologize that it's one of my favorite scenes, and it was improv and not in the original script, and wasn't anything that you came up with.
But it's like staying in character, staying in that vibe.
I loved it.
Yeah.
Another happy accident that happened was in the very last scene when my character meets the new muse, you know, the Federica. There's a part where I bump into her, and originally just like, oh, we bump into each other and that's kind of it. But we did the one shot where I hit her, and the lens hood of the on the camera fell off. It wasn't planned. It happened to hit her the wrong way, and it fell off and hit the ground. And we're kind of laughing, and we're rolling, and I'm thinking, oh my God, Fernanda, don't stop the dialogue. I kept going with my thing, but you know, she's not a trained actress, so she just kind of thought like, oh, we should stop. And I was like, no, keep going. And then we had a good laugh, and then we still used that take. We quickly improvised like a close up of the lens cap hitting the thing of the floor and stuff, and then we cut back to another take where we continued the scene. But like, and that was actually the very first scene that we shot, because Fernanda
Okay.
was only with us for I think 2 days at the beginning of the week before she did her own kind of
Mhm.
Euro trip. So we had to shoot her
Right.
scenes, and of course I have a beard in that scene, so I grew the beard out, and then I shaved it, to show the passage of time,
I didn't even
But
pick
yeah,
up on
that was
that.
the very first. That was the very first scene that we shot. We had that happy accident right away, and I think that's when I kind of knew. Well, that's when I
The
felt like,
stars were
okay, I'm a
aligning. Like
filmmaker now.
this,
Like
this is the thing I
like I
need
had
to
my
something
do.
good
first
is
happy
happening.
accident. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to like comment on something you said about like being the editor, and like how you said maybe you should have got another editor. I do have to commend you for the editing too, especially if you cut the film down from like a 45-minute down to what it is to now, because it takes a lot of willpower to cut out what you might think of as like a very priceless and a perfect scene, and being able to say, no, this doesn't contribute to the soul of the story. Because I could say, as a writer myself, there are times where it's like there will be like pages of something that I've written, and I was like, oh
and
my
you're
God,
very proud of.
I bled on the page. This is perfect, but it doesn't contribute. And like what you said strikes it right on the head. You were like, there's a whole movie told in the last like 2 minutes of Analogic. And that's like, to me, that's what I would aim for. Is it's like in this one little scene, there's so much more that you could go on it, because that's the audience's job. And yes, you might be able to revisit Analogic as a feature in the future, but it's like you're making the audience think like, ooh, what else is going on here? Where else could this go? You're leaving them with that thinking that sticks in their mind. I just wanted to say that after hearing that little thing about the editing.
Yeah, and it wasn't as hard as I thought, because when I did the kind of the final cut of the film, it was about a year, over a year after I had first kind of done it, and I was kind of frustrated. I felt like it should have had more success. I wanted more people to see it. I wanted to be in more festivals. But it wasn't anything about like, oh, I need people to see me. I felt like I owed it to everyone that was involved in the project. I felt I owed it to Shim and
Right.
Kareem and Steven, and to make it as good of a film as I know. I mean, it's all there,
Yeah.
and I felt like, so when I did this kind of final edit, I did it in a really cold manner. I felt like no obligation to anything that I had done before, and I really just
Total different mindset.
Oh, like I really like this
Ruthless.
thing, but like it's not gonna work. So cut, and I cut it, and I mean, I didn't just make it shorter. I also kind of changed some of the structure. I changed some of the ways that the scenes played out by cutting it, and it ended up being my favorite version of the film. And I remember also feeling kind of frustrated at the end of it, because it's like, man, why hadn't I done this like 6 months ago or a year ago? Why couldn't I have done this sooner?
Because we're humans, and
I was frustrated with
there's
myself.
a learning
yeah.
process to creativity. I was gonna compare it to writing music or being in a band or working with a producer, especially when you're writing something that's somewhat collaborative. I was in a band for years, and it was, there were two main guys, like it was their project. They started it, they were writing it. And sometimes you want to make contributions and have ideas, and you think, because of your own tastes and your own experiences, like, oh, like this is what it needs. This is the best thing. But they come back, oh no, you don't want to do that. And you read articles and interviews with bands all the time that'll say, oh, well, this album came out this way because of the producer, and the producer told us to do this thing. It's just interesting dichotomy between like the music creation and the filmmaking, and the fact that you did a lot of that without the external influence of someone, and you were able to make those decisions, and then you were able to be okay with those decisions. That's hard as a creative, I think.
To have that objectivity, I call it.
Right, yeah. To be able to criticize your own work and understand that it's maybe your idea isn't the best idea for it. Yeah, that can be hard.
I hope on whatever I decide to do next, the next project I'm working on, I'll remember that lesson sooner, early on, and say like, okay, like I'll be a little bit more fast with that.
Yeah,
And
just but it's also like there's definitely the risk of overdoing it to the point where you've taken yourself and the emotion out of it completely, and now maybe it comes off that you're telling something that's much more gray or neutral, that doesn't have an opinion,
cold and distant.
Yeah, because I mean, John and I talk about this a lot, but whenever you're creating art in whatever form it is, like, you have to have an opinion. You can't be squeamish about it, and worry about what other people are going to think. Like, if that's what you want, like, you have to have an opinion and you have to go for it, and people will appreciate it or they won't, but you have to be okay with the decisions you made, in the creation process.
And I think that's also, it's a tough thing for a creator to watch their own work after it's done, or in the middle of watching, or even watching just other films, because I know what goes on behind the scene. I'm always seeing. I think Wells used to call it like the ghost of the guy with the clapboard before every shot. Like looking at something, looking at any shot, whether it's like a second long or 5 seconds or 2 minutes. I'm looking at it thinking, okay, where do they put the lights? What lens are they using? What's the distance? What is I'm looking at all these different things. And when I'm watching like any movie, like on TV or any TV show, and then when I'm watching like my own project, my own work, I'm seeing, not only am I seeing like the ghost of the clapboard, but I'm also saying, oh, okay, well, I should have done that. I should have done this differently. I'm seeing all the things that I know now I could have done differently.
Yeah.
But at the time, I didn't know him. I didn't know any better. So it's like, it's nothing I can criticize myself for. But it's frustrating.
But that's the cool.
It's a frustrating thing.
That's the cool thing about art, though, is especially if you have an artist or a creator that has a relatively long history of their creations that are available, to watch or to read or whatever it is, and seeing, those changes over time. As a music guy, I've always been one, like, when it comes to bands and albums, my favorite albums by most bands are oftentimes the ones that are like critically despised because the band took a chance and went in a totally different direction than what their fan base is, accustomed to. But to me, like, that's what's exciting to me, is they've gotten out of their comfort zone and they said, let's try this and see how it goes. And sometimes it's not a good thing. But many times, like for example, the one I like to throw out is Linkin Park. Their first 2 albums are like highly praised as some of the best albums of the 2000s. But their 4th album that came out, most people probably couldn't name their 4th album. It was called 1,000 Suns. It was a concept album. I think there were only 9 like full-length 3-4 minute tracks on it, but it's a 15-track album. And the first 2 tracks of the album are like less than a minute each. And it's got all of these interludes. They use a way more electronics. They use a lot of samples of speeches throughout. But it was such a different experience from what I was expecting to put on a Linkin Park record. And to me, that was what was exciting about it. Whereas other people said, oh, this doesn't sound like Hybrid Theory. I don't like it anymore. Okay, go listen to whatever you want to listen to, but I'm glad they made it.
I just wanted to add something like how we've been talking about like the creative process and like forming everything. There was an interview I actually watched with Michael Chapman, who was the director photographer for Taxi Driver, little movie.
And Raging Bull.
Yep.
Yeah,
I love the cinematography of that movie. And I think the interview was from like the mid 2000s, and he was still talking about what he would do differently and how he wanted to shoot those movies. And it's like, it's proof that the creative process never really ends. Like, it could be years after the fact and you'll still be thinking, well, I could have done that. I could have done this. But I actually want to ask you, like, Josh, how you were talking about like the ghost of the clapper, is kind of like hovering over your shoulder. Like when I'm writing something, there's a reader over my shoulder looking at what I'm doing. Some quotes I saw from like Denis Villeneuve and other filmmakers, they're saying like, I make movies for me. Almost sounds like they're cutting the audience out. When you were making this movie, I'm not sure if this will be a weird question, but when you were making this movie, who were you making it for?
Yeah, who was
in that
in mind?
regard?
Yeah.
I mean, I make movies and I don't want to make movies because I love to make movies, but
Well, part of making
you know,
movie is an audience, and for the audience to be entertained or to
right.
feel something.
And I was gonna say, I think, you know, I want to have an audience. You know, I want people to watch the film. I
Right.
think of it as like, you know, like a painter, or like with a painting. You know, you paint, like, you want people to look at the painting. You want people to see, you know, what you've
If
done.
if if you're
And that's the
happy
thing.
with it, usually there's usually that
Mhm.
caveat.
Yeah, if you say yeah,
Yeah.
right. Um, you know, and I want people to. It's meant to be viewed. It's meant to be seen.
Exactly.
And you know, I feel I don't think I would, you know, kind of compromise myself to say, oh, what will an audience like me to do?
Right.
You know, it's still I am still the artist. It's, you know, whether or not the audience likes the movie, it's up to them. But you know, I want them to say like, oh, okay, I'm going to go see a Josh Pomponio movie and kind of know, not necessarily know what the expectations are going to be, but they're going to know that you know, I'm the creator of the film.
Mhm.
And they're gonna judge it, you know, kind of that way. They're gonna say like, okay, like, I know if I'm gonna go see a Josh Pomponio movie, I'm gonna see X, Y, and Z. You know, I'm expecting, you know, these kind of things. Where you go look at like a painting by like Monet or Renoir, or, you know, Degas, or Picasso. Like, you know, you're going because you like that style of
Right.
painting. You know, and I kind of think of it like also like the idea of creating film should be that way too. Like if you're gonna, if, you know, back in the day when they had kind of patrons of the arts, you know, the patron hired, you know, one of those guys because they liked their style of work. They
Mhm.
wanted them to make a painting in their style. You know, they didn't hire Renoir and say, oh, you know, I really like your painting, Renoir, but can you paint more like you know, Titian or something? You know, can you do work, you know, this, can you,
How
you know, they didn't try
insulting.
to make him do something right. And I feel like that's kind of what the industry, you know, the studio industry now is, that it's like, you know, they're gonna hire a director to make a movie, but they don't want him to make, you know, the movie in his style. They want him to make, you
In a
Yeah.
know, a
corporate
generic movie.
style.
They want to make something like that. They want a corporate style. And you know, I feel like, you know, that's what I hope to be, you know, and as my career hopefully grows, that, you know, I will make a movie. You know, someone will give me money to make a Josh Pomponio movie, not to just make
Right.
a movie.
Right.
Yeah, and also an audience will go see my movie, not just because it's content to be consumed, but because they want to go and see a film by Josh Pomponio.
Mhm.
Oh, and
Just like
And so I think when I was
that's
just
the
like what Brad
goal
said
of
about
any
Linkin Park, it's
creative,
like
I
sorry.
think.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, go Josh.
Well, I was going
John,
to say, just like you said, Brad, about Linkin Park, it's like even though their fourth album was something completely different, you still knew it was a Linkin Park album. So it's like,
Oh, yeah.
there were still some things there that it's like, oh yes, this is Linkin Park, but they were trying something different, just like that.
Mm-hmm.
We'd like to take a brief moment to thank you for listening to Story Weavers. For the enjoyment of our listeners, we want to keep this podcast ad-free and uninterrupted.
If you would like to support us further, check out our options on Patreon. Plus, subscribing will get you behind-the-scenes content, bloopers, access to Book of the Month polls, and more. We appreciate any and all support.
Now back to the episode. Actually, one of the other things, because you told us your second pick for filmmaker after Wells would be Renoir, Josh. Are there any other filmmakers that you were channeling or thinking about, or that you hold in very high esteem while making Analogic or any of your films? Like here I wrote down Buñuel, Rene, and I did write down Woody Allen for Midnight in Paris because of a lot of the iconography. What other filmmakers do you kind of have in here?
I mean, I'm a big fan of Truffaut, also Francois Truffaut. I think he's one of my, you know, probably, you know, also top 5. And I think, I don't know if I was channeling, you know, a specific like Truffaut film. You know, I try not to think of specific films when I'm making my own films. I try to think more of like of just like the feeling or the emotion, things like that. But so definitely like the French New Wave that him and Godard kind of, you know, pioneered was a big influence on Analogic. You know, the idea of shooting, you know, with a small lightweight camera on the streets of Paris, with, you know, no permit, you know, run and gun guerrilla style, you know, like 400 blows or Breathless or something, you know, that, you know, fast kind of editing like Jules and Jim. You know, that's something that was, you know, consciously on my mind of, you know, making the movie. And you know, Wells, you know, I'm not sure how, you know, how linked my film could be to Wells. I think it's a slightly different you know, style
Tone.
than his. I mean, I'm definitely different tone, but technically, I try to use wider angle lenses like he used to use, and playing things longer, which him and Renoir, really preferred. And I think that's what has made it kind of difficult to get accepted into kind of major festivals. That there is a certain aesthetic that films, whether they're small independent short films or big budget studio blockbusters, there's a certain aesthetic that they all follow with lighting and lenses and composition and blocking, which kind of mavericks like Wells and Renoir and Truffaut and other people, they don't really follow that classical aesthetic. And I'm kind of naive enough to think that, like, oh, why don't I try that also? Why don't I try to emulate, I like those kind of things, so surely someone else will like it,
Mhm.
sir, and I think that made Analogic a kind of oddball film to be at festivals,
Mhm.
which but it's still the way that I want to make films. It's still the way that's the way, even if I was to take influence of like classical aesthetic away from myself or my favorite filmmakers, but if I was just going to make a film innocently, I think I would probably still make it in that way, because that seems natural to me.
Mhm.
It's kind of like there's the joke about the guy that goes to the doctor, and he says, I throw up every morning. And the doctor goes, "You throw up every morning? Well, like what?" Or no, I fucked it up. The guy goes to the doctor, says, "I have these really bad headaches, every day. They start in the morning." And the doctor goes, "Oh, like every morning you have these headaches?" And he's like, "Yeah, like every morning I get these headaches." And the doctor's like, "Okay, well, tell us your morning routine." And the guy's like, "Okay, like I get out of bed, I put my, my clothes on, I go to the bathroom, I throw up." And the doctor's like, "Wait, like you throw up like every morning?" And then the guy's like, "Yeah, doesn't everybody?" And because like when you're so used to
Right.
like your routine, when you're so used to kind of your way of things,
Mhm.
and you find out that that's not the other way of doing things, it's a surprise. And I feel like, just like the way that I, like, oh, doesn't everyone like to use wide angle lenses and play scenes in full? Like,
Mhm.
it seems more interesting to me. It seems more, uh,
Mhm.
and I was watching a short film made by a really good friend of mine recently, and really talented person. I loved them to bits. Have worked with them before on other projects too, and I was watching their film, and you know, they're as and but they follow that aesthetic, and it looked really good. It's had a bit more success than Analogic had. um but like I didn't feel like I was watching their film. Like, if it could have
Right.
been made by you, Brad, or John, or
Hmm.
Mhm.
uh you know Joe Schmo. Like, I didn't feel their presence. And I don't think it's, not because they weren't in front of the camera too, but I just felt like, you know, it's okay, and it's okay to follow like the accepted
Hmm.
aesthetic, but you shouldn't follow it to the point that you are now just bland. You are now just part of the content farm
There
or
was
something.
there
Exactly.
was a there was I remember this specifically. It was from one of my college professors. He taught music theory and history, and
They go
so
together.
sort of, but that's not my point. Uh, someone asked him some question, um, and he said, I'll never forget this as long as I live. He said, the reason we learn the rules is so that we can know how to break them. And there's two like schools
Hmm.
of thought when it comes to creativity. And both are valid and have been shown to work, but one is you go in blind and do it. Like, again, I'm going to go for the music side of things because that's what I know. There are a lot of big albums out there over the years with people who barely knew how to play their instrument. But they knew how to pick up a guitar and they heard sounds that they liked, and they were huge successes. But then you also have the train of thought or the way of learning and creating that I was kind of taught, which is learn the rules. Like when it comes to classical music, you go back to Baroque and classical music with Mozart and Bach, and you learn like the chord progressions they used, and you can't have parallel fifths and eighths, and you can't have these tones in the same chord, and all of this stuff. And you learn all of that, and then you get to Beethoven, and Beethoven was like the first master of breaking the rules of classical music. And he's what brought in romantic music, and but especially in classical music because it's a little more highbrow. But the idea that you learn what the rules are, and same with you guys with filmmaking. Like you learn what the rules of filmmaking are so that you know when to break them. But you don't just break them because you can. You have a reason for breaking them.
Very much.
But part of it too is instead of having that journey of messing around to find something that sounds good or looks good, you kind of know what's going to look good or sound good, and you know how to change it so that it's different and unexpected, I guess, if that makes sense.
And Wells called it, in his experience, like the confidence of ignorance, because he liked to tell this story about how when he made Citizen Kane, he didn't really know how to make a movie. He didn't know that there were, he didn't know the rules, so he thought he could do anything that he imagined, and so he asked for things that anyone else would have said are impossible to do, but he had support that they then tried to make these wild, these weird things come true. So he said that he had this confidence because he didn't know he was walking along the edge of a cliff. He had the perfect amount of confidence. He didn't know the rules. He didn't know how to where to fail, because he didn't know that there could be any failure. He just thought if you could do it, the eye can see it. You can do it with the camera.
Yeah. And sometimes that's honestly, as crazy as it sounds, sometimes that's the easier way to go, because sometimes when you know the rules, sometimes you get stuck in them. Even if you're trying to break them, you get stuck in them, and all you're focusing on is what you should do or what you're supposed to do or how it's normally done, instead of just being like, screw it, like this makes more sense, and I think this is better and this works better. And sometimes if you don't know what the rules are, you do it anyways.
I mean, it's like that, at least how I went to film school and such. It's like I could say I came at it from that backwards path. Like I loved storytelling, I loved films, and it's like my first way of like writing scripts or like writing books was, okay, taking all of these influences and putting them together in the way that worked best, not any established rules. And then when I went to college to study film and script writing and everything, suddenly, like you said, there were these rules put down, and some of them I would look at them and say, you don't need to do that. Like, you don't need to follow the 3-act structure directly to the letter. And it's like, I very clearly remember that, like some professors saying like, yeah, someone said like, they didn't compare me to Orson Welles because I am nowhere near like that, but they referred to that, like the talent of ignorance or whatever he called it. It's like, you don't know that that's wrong, so you're saying, why not do it? It works.
Right.
It's like taking these two disparate pieces and putting them together. I mean, if you look at, because like you were talking about the French New Wave, Josh, there was an American New Wave as well, and it immediately made me think of like William Friedkin with The French Connection, which, I'm sure, as we all know, is a very slow-paced and methodical and dramatic movie. But like the fast editing, the very spontaneous thing, and like when you said filming without permits, that chase scene filmed without permits and everything, it's like you're taking influences from somewhere else and you're saying how, this works for this, what I want to do. I'm not doing it because it worked before. If that makes any sense.
It's like how can we push it further?
Exactly. How can
we advance it more?
Right. Taking something that, like you said, the French masters use for very dramatic purposes, and it's like, hey, this could work as like the American model, the very pumped up, like Mad Max style kind of action, and just adapting it into that. And you can see the influences of it, like between the two, if you look at it from a filmmaking perspective.
And I think it's also funny because, technology has evolved in such a way as to make things easier. Cameras are smaller and lighter weight. It's a lot less expensive now to make a film, whether it's a big film or a small film. Everything has gotten so compact and small that things could be, faster, more intense. You could have, scenes play out for longer minutes, for 10, 15, 20 minutes because you don't have, change a film reel every 10 minutes. You could do things in like more natural lighting because, digital imaging sensors are sensitive and differently than film. And yet the classical aesthetic structure has remained the same, even though the technology has changed. The ways in which we are using it are still kind of the old ways.
They're modeling that,
you
like
know?
the whole 24 frames per second. Even like when
convenient.
when the Hobbit movies came out, there was this whole thing. It's like they're being filmed at, I think it was like 48 frames per second at this insane frame
Oh,
rate.
yeah, it was
they
and
only
they
doubled it,
failed
yeah.
because
It was
they
like
didn't look
the uncanny
like we
valley.
expect.
It was
Exactly.
the uncanny valley
Yeah.
effect.
So it's yeah, just like you said, it's like some things continue to move forward, but then there are other things that you can break, and it's just inherently knowing which ones you can play around with, which ones you can bend, and which ones no, those are hard and fast. You cannot screw with frame rate, that sort of thing, or like the 180-degree rule.
Yeah. I had kind of triggered some people in a Wells group on Facebook that I'm in when I posted about how I shared a picture of him shooting Othello with like a really small camera and simple setup, and I was saying like it amazes me that he could do all these things so simply, and I had speculated that he would love modern digital filmmaking because cameras
God,
are
yes.
lighter, smaller.
Mhm.
It would be so easy for him to make a film,
Yeah.
and all these people in the group are probably like older, and they had that kind of well Wells would never shoot on digital because film has the aesthetic and it's a precise thing and blah blah blah, like all. And I'm like, no,
No,
like Wells would like
it was convenience.
years before he died.
hmm
Yeah, it was convenience. Wells was the experiment with videotape before he died. He was always at the forefront of technology, and even on Kane, he was saying, he asked Greg Tolan, it's like, do we really need all this film? Do we really need this whole big camera? And Tolan was like, no, one day it'll just be like an electric eye. They'll just have a lens, and you'll just point the lens somewhere, and
Yeah.
that'll be it.
I mean,
And,
Here
look
we
at
are.
David Fincher's career path is
Yeah.
almost the same thing. He started with film, and then as soon as he saw digital, it's like this man who would do 100 takes of something was like, oh my God, I could fill up a memory card and just keep going. Like,
Right.
like you said, Orson Welles or any of those old masters, like Hitchcock even, would probably see that and be like, good.
And digital storage is
Yeah.
also way less expensive than
Exactly.
analog
It's the film
film
cost.
Well, and even just like the storage, like those, you had to put those film reels somewhere, and when you were editing them, they had to be somewhere. I mean, just
Right.
real estate, physical space.
That's why there's so many lost films now, and it's
Yeah.
like Josh, how you mentioned like Orson Welles, like if you like he wanted to say like, do we need all this film? Do we need this? And like the techniques he used. This might be better for the Wells episode actually.
Whatever.
Yeah.
But
we can cut and paste.
there was
it.
actually one question I wanted to ask you about Orson Welles too.
Well, ask it.
I am
We've
in
got
sec,
him
but
here.
I just wanted to say that like him wanting, like people complaining about how, oh, well, Welles would never have shot because the aesthetic of film, the grain. You realize that filmmaking was always about advancements of technology. I mean, special effects, cinematography, color photography.
They wanted to get rid of
or
the grain.
high contrast. It's like,
Right.
it's like it's always been about advancing the technology and even subtle things. It's always been about advancement. So this idea of like, no, let's go back. It's like
It's
that's almost
definitely a nostalgia thing.
antithetical to filmmaking.
I know, like my brother, when he was in college, he got a record player, and he will exclusively buy used records because when he listens to a record, he wants to hear the hiss and the crackle.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, no, when I want to listen to a record, I want a clean record, but I want that wide dynamic range. I want the quiet things to be quiet and the loud things to be loud, which is something that is mostly lost in the digital age and the radio age. I always find that funny. I'm like, oh, look, I've got like your favorite album here. He's like, yeah, but it's brand new. I don't want to buy that on vinyl. It's brand new. I can listen to it on my phone.
Okay, I'll go scratch it with my
Okay.
keys for a bit.
Okay, now get a better stereo system.
It's definitely a weird paradox because, like, recently, my wife and I saw Oppenheimer, and we saw it twice. We saw opening weekend in like digital IMAX, like I think it's like the the biggest IMAX screen, after like the full on film IMAX,
Mhm.
and it was such a powerful film, powerful visual medium, IMAX, and we were blown away by it. And then I think like a month later, we saw a standard 70 millimeter film print of it, and again, same film but different format, and it looked. I mean, the movie was beautiful on IMAX digital. Seeing like a 70 millimeter print and seeing kind of the grain and the scratches and the dust and
Mhm.
speckles, it was somehow more beautiful, and I'm more appreciative of it.
Mhm.
So it's weird.
Yeah.
There's still something that's so attractive about film, and if you can see a film, if you can see if a movie was shot on film and then you see it projected on film, I think that is definitely like the way
Yeah.
to go. But like,
Mhm.
if you're gonna make a movie and shoot it on film, but then it's gonna premiere on Netflix and
Mhm.
everyone's watching on their smart TVs with UHD upscaling, like,
As so and so intended.
why?
That's why it's like
Right.
it's like why
Like, I
I
mean,
hate listening to live albums that don't have crowd noise or have been
mhm.
edited or overdubbed because someone fucked up a solo. Like I hate that.
Mhm.
Like I'm happy when I go to a show and and see something like that, or if I'm listening to a live album, like I want to hear the crowd singing along. If I didn't want that, I'd go listen to the studio version.
Do you know the whole story about how they shot and edited Dune, the first of the newer
John might,
Dune,
but
the
I
new
do
first part
not.
of Dune?
You mean the
No.
Denis Villeneuve
So
Dune?
The new
yeah,
one.
yeah. So they shot it on digital.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, so they started on digital, and then they made a film print of the digital.
I mean, I can
Of the
see
digital movie.
why for environmental
They
reasons.
ran
I can
it-
see
they ran
because
it
the
through-
film of the desert.
It doesn't end there.
Oh,
Okay,
boy.
so they shot on digital. They make a film print of it, and then they scanned the film print to edit, and they edited
digitally.
They edited the digital movie from a scan of a film. Yeah,
I want to say, I know
and-
the movie is called Dune, but I think they took it a bit too literally. Like,
yeah.
Well, it's like
And and I remember
there are a lot of audio
it's just
presets
crazy.
that people will run their audio through to make it sound quote more analog than digital.
right.
And a lot of it, I think, is it's a nostalgia thing.
That's one thing. Like how we were talking about how like newer generations are looking at nostalgia, or criticizing it, or whatever, and yet they want to go back to like the 80s aesthetics that they haven't even been part of. And I just find that interesting. It's like things that
it's a different
like Orson
experience.
Welles and filmmakers then wanted to get out of. And then we got out of it. Now we want to go back to it. And it's like, in a way, I almost wonder why.
It's just a different experience. It's like, this is what we've always known.
Always
but wait,
done.
there
But I also
was a
think it's-
different way that things were done. So like, I'm curious about that.
It has to do a little bit, I think, with the ingenuity of it too. Like how we were talking about, like, Wells would never have shot on digital because it's too easy. I remember a story about the original King Kong, which I saw when I was like 10, and that was like, oh my God, it was a cool movie to see, because for the time it was ingenuitive. But one of the things, if you look, you don't even have to look hard, you can see where the thumbs of the animators made indents in the fur of all the animals. And it's like, it's a huge gaffe, but you don't really care because the movie's so fun.
Yeah.
Animators who still do claymation by hand, or any animation by hand, they do that on purpose now.
Yeah.
As an homage to that movie, but also to show this was done by hand. Here is my literal fingerprint on the movie. And it's like, in a way, you have to admire that, but
new lightsabers and blaster colors in digitally afterwards.
yeah, or digitized Jabba the Hutt.
I'm kind of guilty of that myself with Analogic. The movie was shot on digital. It's black and white. And that's a total aesthetic choice.
But it's so good because
evoke oldness.
I love it.
And
I was going to ask, what was the visual inspiration? And also, this is random because I don't think it was very feasible. Did you ever consider shooting it on film? Like even just momentarily, like, gee.
Wishful thinking.
I was too wishful thinking to be on film.
Okay.
Yeah, but it'd be cool. I mean, I've been thinking shooting my next project on film, and we were kind of running the numbers and stuff, and just like,
it's too much of a pain in the ass.
It's not feasible.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah.
I don't want to.
And I was trying to justify by saying
around.
like, oh, it'll help, blah blah blah, the narrative. Like, nah, it's like not. But I mean, visually for Analogic, I mean, definitely like, Truffaut and the new wave, that kind of guerrilla style on the streets in black and white,
Well, and black and white has always been
Wells
kind
with
of
the
like
wide angle.
it's associated with like the romantic. I think that, at least for me watching it, I think, it's got that kind of softer romanticized feel to it
It's an
because
actor's
it's black
best
and
friend,
white. Yeah.
too. Because black and white, it makes you focus on the faces and the emotions rather than, oh, how beautiful the costume is. I think it was Orson Welles who said that, or some famous filmmaker. And it's like, I can see it, because even me, I long for a story or like a script that I write or come across that I could justify shooting in black and white, because there's just something about it.
I also think, and I've shot other projects in black and white, like in college and stuff, and it was always digital that we then put in black and white. But it was always because, and again, I started way before digital mirrorless and digital cinema. Kind of, I was shooting on DV tapes, but,
I remember those days.
transferring them with FireWire onto the
oh my god,
computer.
FireWire IP.
Yeah, FireWire cables. Yeah. And digital video, the mini DV cassettes, they look like video. They never really look cinematic. And one of the ways that I thought they could was if you took all the color out. And I think even today, like even if you're shooting on, we shot like on a small little Fuji camera, great little camera, but I think unless you're shooting on like a high end, like a Red or like an Arriflex, digital cinema camera, films still look like digital. They don't quite have that cinematic look if you're shooting on kind of the lower end of the prosumer level of cameras. And I think as much as I love the camera that I used, I think it still looked it still looked kind of digital. And I just thought black and white will kind of enhance it. It'll take away from that sharpness and stuff. And
it also just increases, with the name of the film being called Analogic. And an ode to the analog, the black and white. I mean, that's how all the original films were shot and projected, because that was all the technology could afford at the time. So yeah, it definitely it adds that romantic nostalgia effect to it. And I think that fits with the whole context of the story of wanting to meet someone and not need to know their past to be able to make a connection with them.
Right.
There's one scene though that looks incredible in color, and that's the river scene at sunset. Because that just has that golden hour lighting, and that looked incredible and stuff.
It would have been like cheesy though if that had been like the only
color one in
scene.
Color.
It would have too on the nose.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Do you mind if I ask that Wells question really quick before we wrap up?
Of course. Go ahead.
Okay. So
please, I would love to wrap on that.
The one, because you mentioned like Wells obviously was a like massive influence on many filmmakers that came after him up until the current day. And then you mentioned that he was big overseas as well. Many films. And I mean, F for Fake was, if I remember right, filmed in Paris, and it takes place in Paris. Do you think that he inspired filmmakers in Europe as well? And do you think any of them influenced him? Do you think he picked up techniques from them, and what do you think they were?
I think the first part is definitely true. Touch of Evil, which was butchered by the studio, got a very limited release, but it won the top prize at the Brussels World Fair, I think in 1958. And Truffaut and Godard, both saw it and they both loved it. And they, at different points, they wrote about how that was the film that inspired them to become, filmmaker. They wanted to stop being film critics and become filmmakers themselves. And it was because of, this heavily compromised version of Touch of Evil that inspired them to do that. And of course, Truffaut was a big influence on Scorsese. Scorsese said how Goodfellas is really inspired by Jules and Jim with that the kind of fastness of the cutting and the beginning. And you think about all the filmmakers that have been inspired by Truffaut and Godard, and they're influential from Wells. As far as like Wells' contemporary or younger cinema people inspiring him. Wells claimed to not watch a lot of movies because he didn't want to be influenced by other filmmakers. Like he claimed to. I think Oya Kodar said that they only watch like bad movies.
Learn what not to do.
Like light entertainment. Yeah. I think Renoir was had a effect on Wells. Renoir had a very similar style, less intense, I think, as than Wells, but definitely the same, very same intentions. And Wells always told the story about how before making Kane, he watched Stagecoach 40 times by John Ford to learn how to make a movie. And so he always talked about Renoir, Ford, and von Stroheim were kind of
Oh,
his
yes.
Interesting.
big influences. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
So I guess that about wraps up this episode of Story Weavers. Josh, thank you for coming on and discussing Orson Welles in the previous episode and your film Analogic here. It was wonderful talking with you, and you had a lot of great things to say, so thank you.
And
Of course. Thank
we're
you for having me.
very much looking forward to whatever project
Whatever
you
your
have
next
going on
project
next.
is.
And we
like
wanna know
you
about
said,
it.
everything you've learned and everything that you're looking forward to doing, we hope you do it, and we can't wait to see it.
Thank you. I hope to come back and talk about it with you
Oh,
sometime.
please, we would love to have you. Don't just let us know. So yes, and for anyone who does want to check out Josh's film Analogic, we'll be linking it in the description if this is on YouTube, or just check the description on whatever platform you're watching it in. It'll be linked there. And thank you for listening to Story Weavers. Thank you for listening to this episode of Story Weavers. As ever, we're incredibly grateful to all of our listeners and contributors. Come back next week for the next installment of Story Weavers.